Okay, is this any better?
Yeah.
So include billionaire capitalists, Elon Musk, people who,
Yeah.
oppose socialism, like the organization where workers own the means of production,
Yeah.
where, commodities are produced on based of need, not profit, worker alienation is abolished, etc. So you asked me to prove
That's
like
not. Hold on. Even Marx said that a society where production is based on need. First of all, that's called poverty, right? That's not fucking communism. Second of all, the principle where they say from each according to their ability to each according to their need. That's not even what they say is socialism. They say that's far out in the future. That's the highest and final stage of communism. That's what Lenin said. Lenin's the one who imposed the distinction, by the way, between communism and socialism.
Yeah, that's right. They didn't use those terms like as different stages until after Marx. But I guess the discrepancy is like the way you were describing socialism kind of like to me it seemed that it was just eroding the meaning of the word. Like pretty much anybody could be
that's why it means nothing to call yourself a socialist today, because you're right, the word has been totally eroded and basically means fuck all.
Because, for example, there are people who consider themselves
it's superfluous,
capitalists.
because socialism already won.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like chuds in the Midwest or something who consider themselves capitalists, yet they own no capital. They don't control any means of production. They're just workers themselves, but they advocate for the capitalist system, right?
But you realize capital, just like how there's Mao Zedong thought, there's Kim Il Sung thought, and there's Hoxha, Enver Hoxha, and there was Titoism. In the Cold War, America created an ideology called free market capitalism, which was actually just another flavor of socialism.
I don't know if I agree with that.
I'm literally giving you the biggest red pill of your life for free, by the way.
Okay, well, would you agree with a textbook issued by the Economic Institute of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR? Something along those lines that describes socialism? Not just Marx, just start the basis of the USSR.
It depends what's the context. What are they referring it to? If they're referring to
describing a socialist society and a socialist economy.
No, I think they're talking about socialism as a mode of production.
Okay, well, here, I'll just read
this. Talking
about
socialism as a mode of production, but okay, read it to me how they describe it.
Yeah, the economic basis of socialist society is a socialist system of national economy, socialist ownership of the means of production, which have been consolidated by elimination of the capitalist economic system, the abolishment of the private ownership of the means of production, and the eradication of exploitation of man by man, right? So
I don't agree with the latter description, but by that definition, the U.S. is socialist today.
Well, I mean, not at all, because in the U.S., capitalism has not been abolished. Private ownership
That's not
is
what they
overwhelming.
Said. No, private ownership is abolished. There's no private ownership.
Really? In what way? Like
ask libertarians. Ask the libertarians. You don't really have any private ownership. We have more
like Walmart, the company.
We have government
is publicly owned.
We have government contracts that tell us we can have things. We don't actually own them, according to the classical liberalism. We don't really own anything.
Yeah, exactly. The government doesn't own them. The workers don't own them. They're owned by capitalists.
No one actually.
So like no one owns
them no one owns them individually at all, which means they're not.
Yeah, no one owns them individually, but collectively they're owned by a cabal, a group, a cartel of capitalists, right?
If it's owned by a group, that means it's socialized. Lenin, by the way, Lenin called monopoly capitalism a form of the socialization of means of production.
Yeah, but by socialization, he meant like the transition from individual guilds producing commodities.
He meant the transition from capitalism to socialism, and he said
like like the industrialization process.
But he said that this was the transition from capitalism to socialism. He literally said that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the industrialization, which would lead to...
No, he wasn't fucking talking about industrialization. Industrialization happened in the 19th century. When Lenin was describing imperialism in the stage of monopoly capitalism, he was talking specifically about the way in which the means of production were becoming concentrated and socialized and aggregated, right?
Yeah,
And it was the
again, but by
elimination of a free
socialized,
market and the transition to a society that, in Lenin's eyes, was more planned, more socialized, and had less room for capitalist markets. And he said this was a transition into socialism.
yeah, the word socialized doesn't mean that it was socialist. It just means that they transitioned
Yeah,
from
it wasn't socialist at Lenin's time, according to Lenin, because it was the highest stage of capitalism.
Okay, again, just because an industry is socialized, meaning that it doesn't take place like in the household, or it doesn't take place in individual like family owned or like guilds or something, doesn't mean
Hold
that
on,
it's
big
publicly owned or
industry. Okay,
socialist.
capitalist industry in the 19th century wasn't at the level of guilds or families, but you could still say it was capitalist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not why Lenin was talking about the socialization of the means of production. He's specifically talking about how the means of production are becoming.
When Lenin wrote that, he was describing how capital tends to monopolize, how industry in capitalism tends to come to a monopolization of all industries, right? Is what he was describing. And he's saying socialism is not socialism, but socialization of industry is a process that can lead in that under
Socialization of
capitalism.
industry literally just means that industry increasingly organizes itself around the fulfillment of social life. Okay? So, yes. I mean, even, yeah, as Benigne's quoting in my chat, Engels literally described this as a dialectical process in which he literally talked about how a socialist society is invading from the future and transforming our society into it. He called
Yeah.
it the invading socialist society, which was through the trusts and the cartels and through the monopolies. So you have to ask yourself the question, what has happened since Lenin's time?
hmm But the point of contention that I have with like what you're sort of talking about with socialism is the part that you disregard this last sentence, the abolition of private ownership of the means of production and the eradication.
It has been abolished. The
of
libertarians are right.
it. Okay, well, I guess that's just
In
something
no
that
meaningful
I
sense
disagree with.
is property private any longer. Private property has ceased to exist, and this network of global financial institutions, which by the way is completely irrational and inefficient when it comes to the actual management of resources and goods, and which is being increasingly organized by completely impersonal algorithms like Aladdin, which is used by BlackRock and which accounts for how many trillions of the global economy now? Yeah, that is not actually because of private property. That is specifically because capitalism has culminated and condensed itself into a type of arbitrary institutional political arrangement. There is no vitality or any there's no vitality or any vigor to a capitalist system proper whatsoever. We're basically living in a socialist economy that is being held hostage by these dogmatic precepts, first of all, in no specific order, institutional arrangements that are the legacy of the 20th century, right? And all of these cartels and monopoly groups of families like the Rockefellers and the Morgans and whoever else you want to name them, who have basically maintained their power in an increasingly in a way that is increasingly circumvents the laws of capitalist accumulation, which is based on like brute political power, like in feudalism.
Okay, I just see like if you describe sort of the economic reality of today as being socialist, then it would just ask like, then what are you fighting for? Then like, what's the purpose if socialism has already been achieved?
Because socialism is just the base, but the superstructure is still came from the old system.
Yeah,
So
that's what he talks about in Critique of the Goethe program. But again, I'm just gonna ask you like, how do you define private ownership? Because here,
well,
I'll just
I'll
let
put
you
it this
do
way:
that.
did you think there's class struggle under socialism?
It depends on what degree of
Well, we're
socialism.
Maoists, and according to
Classes
Mao,
go.
yeah, but according to Mao, we're Maoists. Class struggle continues through socialism, and the whole. I have said the whole key to today's struggle is the Sino-Soviet split. Actually, The Sino-Soviet split proved there's a class struggle under socialism. And that's the same struggle we're dealing with now, where our professional managerial class and our state bureaucracy, as well as the monopoly capitalists, kind of do resemble the Soviet bureaucracy, of which was a kind of, that's where Barbara Eichenreich got her critique of the professional managerials in the first place. It was against the Soviet bureaucracy, right? And that's what the Western bureaucracy and the Western establishment increasingly resembles. We are kind of waging a class struggle that is within socialism, and that is the whole scandal of what we're dealing with in the contemporary
and so
age.
just like as an anarchist, that would probably be one of the points that I would use to sort of explain why the USSR was not, fully communist or like entirely socialist, just because of the fact that the way that the party was structured and the levers of power were structured.
It's not class, though. That has nothing to do with class struggle.
Not class, but function.
Let me tell you the truth. You're basically relying on an Anglo-Saxon.
Workers had no democratic control.
Yeah, but all of your conceptions of control, sovereignty, and power derive from the metaphysics of statehood created under the conditions of 17th century Anglo-Saxon modernity, where they viewed this kind of state of nature of complete wilderness, and that power is like a zero-sum game, where it's like you have power and you hold it over others at their expense at this individual level. Like, we are all individual, sovereign, free beings, and power necessarily comes at each and every one of them.
I read the Leviathan.
Well, it doesn't have to be Hobbes. It can be John Locke, whatever you want, but it's basically this idea of state power where all forms of state power come at the expense of the range of will, freedom, and inherent natural liberty of the individual. Whether that's the Hobbesian wilderness, where we are individual animals running around in the forest killing each other for food and for competition, or you can have a Rousseau view where we're all free individuals and we're expressing our natural liberty running around naked in the forest, or you can have the Locke view where we have this inherent, innate, natural law of liberty, whatever the fuck you want, right? It's all coming from the same metaphysics it's all coming from a very specific, very non-universal view of the relationship between the state and human beings, as well as nature, which was definitively outmoded and overthrown by the science of Marxism-Leninism. And you have to understand that ideologies like anarchism, well, the most famous anarchist in history was Adolf Hitler, right? So
I'm pretty sure it's like Emma Goldman.
No, it is definitely Adolf Hitler. By the way, Emma Goldman is actually famous for her racist vitriol, blaming the problem of Bolshevism on the Asiatic character and non-European character of the Russians and the peasants. Oh, they're inherently Oriental despots. She said all sorts of racist, vitriolic shit. All of that culminates in Adolf Hitler. All of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Just because Emma Goldman said something doesn't mean I'm going to automatically agree with it. So if she did say that, I obviously denounce that.
I'm telling you the truth. Hitler was an anarchist.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure Hitler was a fascist. I mean,
it's the same thing. Where do you think fascism came from? Fascism has its origins in syndicalism, right? Through George Sorel, right? And that's really the bridge between anarchism and fascism, is that it was a form of anarchism, and they took it through the union syndicalist view of anarchism, right? Culminated into the corporates of fascist statehood, corporates, right? The corporates that mediate the relationship between the state and civil society economically. And that from that corporatism, you basically get fascism, right? According to Mussolini. So, actually, fascism does have its origins in anarchism, and it's basically an ultra-left deviation. Because when the Second International broke down of social democracy, which almost all of the major leftists in Europe were a part of, all the major socialists in Europe were a part of, there was a lot of leftist, ultra-leftist deviations. Lenin talked about it in left-wing infantile disorder, right? Left-wing communism and infantile disorder. So you had the Bolsheviks, which broke with social democracy in a rather clean way, according to the continuity of historical time, in a way that's consistent with dialectical materialism. And on the other hand, you had all these ultra-left deviations from social democracy, the way the RICO cope with its destruction, and those forms of anarchism, council communism. And then also you had Mussolini's fascism, which was just another ultra-leftist deviation from trying to make sense of the collapse of social democracy in the midst of World War I. And they actually saw World War I as a revolutionary force, which would mobilize all of Europe, and it'd be this thing that would awaken us and be an anti-bourgeois force. And that's the whole story of fascism, by the way. So actually, it does have its origins in anarchism. They saw World War I as this chaotic, anarchistic event, which was going to overthrow the old order of Europe in the past. That's what they saw World War I as. It was in a form of anarchy, right? They're anarchists.
Yeah, I mean, okay, dude, just slow down just a
And by,
little
by the way,
bit,
I
you
don't
know?
take Adderall. This all comes naturally, by the way.
No, I mean, I get it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, when you compare to like someone like how like, Destiny speaks, I'm just like, goddamn, you know, I'm not a DGG or anything like that, but I just have to say that I fundamentally disagree with that conception of anarchism. You know, just because, like, in the simplest form, anarchism, simply put, is just the seeking the abolition of unjust hierarchies, right? So if you just go off of that, fascism is probably
Well, look,
constitutes one of
defining
the
something as
worst.
the abolition of unjust hierarchies, that's like saying I want to abolish a bad Monday. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't actually like refer to anything real. It's kind of a
Well,
tautology where
no.
it's like I want a good thing and not a bad thing. Well, you have to be more specific. Like nobody wants anything to be unjust. Justice by nature is tautologically and axiomatically defined as a state of balance and a state of good. If something is unjust, that means it's deviated from what you consider a natural and good order, right? So anyone who's going to find
Yeah.
something as unjust, I mean, yeah, we don't, no one wants anything unjust. It's just like you have to get to the meat of potatoes of why you're characterizing state power and the world that exists today as unjust. That's not going to define the essence of what your ideology is in the first place. And it's really not hard to see how you get from A to B from there to Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. It's very hard to see how you get from, you know, the abolition of unjust hierarchies to Adolf Hitler, who was
Well,
constructing a
because when you put it this
hierarchy
way, right?
based on
When you
racial
consider the
purity.
entire wealth of the past, right? When you consider the entire wealth of the past and all the the wealth, the accumulation of all the things that we've inherited, like all the forms of state power, political power, society, culture, tradition, all that. When you all consider that completely unjust and completely meaningless and all, it's completely arbitrary in the face of the equality of the modern subject, the Cartesian subject, right? You end up getting to this liquidationist point of view where you can kind of arbitrarily exterminate things wholeheartedly from history, replace them entirely with your own, with these mythological fantasies you pull entirely out of your own ass, and that's really where fascism and the Hitler thing is coming from. It's this anarchic way of destroying the entire past, destroying the entire world, replacing it with your own fantasy instead. So that's why he can say we can go and invade Eastern Europe, we can enslave the Slavs, we can exterminate the Slavs, exterminate whole peoples, whole histories, whole cultures, whole groups, and get into all this genocide. And the reason because he shares the anarchistic presumption that all those things that exist in place, they're just like unjust hierarchies. They're all completely arbitrary things we've inherited from the past, and we have to replace them with the Cartesian cogito of modernity.
No, I would argue against that because it would be an unprincipled application
Well,
of the term
no,
unjust.
no, it
So,
wouldn't because the premise of that being an unjust target doesn't mean it's possible for there to be a just target. Everything can be completely arbitrary, primordial soup of just complete chaos, which is what the fascist view is,
well,
which
yeah,
is what the
that's
anarchist
why
view
you
is.
have to have certain
And anarchists
axioms
are
to
good at breaking
govern
things and they're good at blowing things up, but they've
what's.
never been good at building anything. They need people like Adolf Hitler to ever build anything, and that's what Hitler
Well,
did.
I don't think that's necessarily true. You could look at the anarchist communes of
Chaz,
Catalonia. You could
Chaz,
jazz. What do you mean jazz?
Catalonia was a complete catastrophe and a failure by that. Everyone, even George Orwell, who called himself an anarchist, he went to Catalonia. He said, "What a dump! This was like the Chaz of the 30s. This was a complete dump. It was completely degenerate. Life was so horrible. The peasants were rebelling against them in Catalonia. Nobody was having a good time there, and that's why Franco's forces won because those anarchists were having such a shitty mess in Catalonia. Everyone knew Catalonia was a fucking disaster, right? It only lasted, but yeah, it only lasted 4 years anyway. They couldn't even hold themselves, and yeah, being able to militarily repel the fascist forces is a good index of how well you're being able to organize your society in the first place. So I don't think anarchists have ever been good at organizing anything in their lives.
Well, I mean, I don't know. There have definitely been throughout history, you know, anarchist communes. You could even look at prehistory, the
Give
way that we
examples of historical anarchist communes.
I mean, you could say Rojava right now, but I feel like Rojava is kind of too
Oh,
CIA.
it's a CIA experiment funded by the Americans. There's nothing anarchist about it. If this has been anarchist, why are they getting all their funds from the Americans or the CIA? It's the only thing that's propping them up.
Okay, I agree with you. Roja is probably most definitely CIA, but if you look at the way that they actually organize their government, you know, semi-representative direct democracy with socialist mode of production, it's pretty stable and pretty good, I would say.
There's nothing solid. What are you talking about? It's an organized democracy. This is all lip service to the fact that this is an ethno-supremacist, exclusionary form of, it's just the Kurdish form of government. It's funded by the U.S. and yeah, they have all their virtue signaling organization, whatever the fuck they do. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, look at the system absent of the people who are in the system.
You can't. You can't put it in a vacuum because that system wouldn't even be able to be sustainable without the CIA and the U.S. support. I mean, you could have the U.S. literally parachute me down in the middle of the desert, and with 5 other people, we could set up any system we want and be successful because we're getting the protection from Uncle Sam. That's the truth.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's just fundamental disagreements, and generally just the way you define socialism, I feel like I disagree with because, like I said, it's just like eroding the word in itself.
The word does deserve to be eroded because it's completely eroded. Where socialism doesn't really have any. We shouldn't make a big deal of this word socialism because it's really divisive too. It's especially divisive in America because a lot of workers, when they hear the word socialism, they don't throw a fit over it. And have a cool, relaxed attitude toward it. Then workers aren't going to really have a problem, right? If you just have socialism, whatever, workers can be like, okay, that's not the main point. But we're not trying to impose this radically alien system that we have no familiarity with whatsoever. When we talk about socialism, we're talking about fighting the capitalist establishment, whatever, and workers can get on board with that. When we talk about socialism, it's a way to radically transform our way of life and what people are used to and what they know makes sense. People are not going to be on board with that. It's going to be a crazy utopian thing that workers will never be on board with because by the end of the day, workers are normal human beings. They want to have a family, they want to live their lives, they want to be able to get by. They don't want to have to be imposed with this crazy alien idea called socialism. It's just there's no point in making it a big deal.
So you're saying we should just do away with the word because
no, we should trivialize it. We shouldn't do away with it, but let's trivialize it.
That it has.
We're not going to do away with it, but let's just trivialize it. Let's stop making a big deal over it. Let's stop attributing so much value and significance to the word. Let's use it very loosely, and it's not going to be a big deal. We don't have to gatekeep it.
Okay, sure. I'm all for not gatekeeping it, I think. But when I sort of use the word colloquially, right, what I'm describing is when workers own the means of their production and they have meaningful democratic control over their workplace, right, where they don't suffer.
I don't want to have democratic control of the workplace. I think most people don't want to have democratic control of the person. Want to go to work, clock in, clock out, do what we got to do, then go home and then do what we want to do on our own time. You go to the workplace, you have democratic control over how we with toilet paper in the bathroom. We don't want to deal with these minute, small things. They waste our time. Let me tell you a story. Someone went to the Soviet Union, right? They traveled in the 1930s, and they had a story about this workers' democracy. The Soviet Union did have a type of workers' democracy at the workplace, and this is what happened. They would work, right? And then afterward, they would have a meeting where they would say, okay, workers, sit down and decide on how you want your workplace organized and shit. And the workers hated it so fucking much because all they want to do is go home. They don't want to deal with this bullshit of having to govern and legislate daily life, through these little councils.
Well, yeah, it's done. The goal eventually is to make it to the point where our material needs are met enough to the point, the material needs of subsistence, to where you don't have to.
The only reason why you need to, the only reason you need checks and balances over how the workplace is controlled in such a radical way as described by breadtube socialists is if you begin from the presumption that human beings are inherently evil and inherently bad and that all power comes at the expense of individuals, which is an Anglo-Saxon metaphysical view of state power, which I do not share. I think efficient managers can manage workplaces while taking into account the basic human everyday needs of the workplace without having to distribute power in a completely horizontal and equal way. Now, can workers give feedback? Yeah, even in China, unions have workers have representation on the board of every single company in China, right? So yeah, they can give input and stuff, and actually, if there's something that the managers are missing and they're not being cognizant of and they need awareness of, yeah, I agree that there should be there. But ultimately, it doesn't need to be completely 100% run by the workers that are working it instead of managers and instead of people who know what they're doing. I don't think so.
I'm not saying that human nature is necessarily evil or because you advocate worker control, signifies that. What I'm saying is that under capitalism, we have these inherent roles that incentivize this behavior and the exploitation of the worker. It's not necessarily speaking upon human nature, if not the organization of the system, which causes humans to behave a certain way.
This is the issue. It's not about the organization of the system whatsoever. This is coming from Foucault, Michael Foucault, the French guy who's the pedo. He was adopted by the left. They looked at it's all about the power and organization of our society instead of the mode of production and instead of the economic fundamental base of how things are made in the first place and how we actually feed ourselves and eat ourselves. You need to shift from a view of having this Michael Foucault stuff, fixation on the organization of power. It's completely infantile. It's completely juvenile. Have more a view of a kind of political economy. We've got to understand currencies, understand Bitcoin, understand fiat, understand foreign exchange currencies, understand the petrodollar, understand all these kind of systems in the world and geopolitics and all this kind of shit works, and you're going to have a better view of socialism instead of focusing more on this kind of stuff. Focus more on unleashing the forces of production and what's going on at that level rather than on this kind of thing about how do we organize this and how do we organize that. Organization is not horizontal, spatial organization. It's not really that important. What we need is the new sense of temporal organization of fossil fuels and all this kind of stuff. Let's focus on what is the actual engine that drives our economy and how is it being driven instead of how is it organized. Because how is it organized is secondary from the fact of how it's being driven and what's making it tick in the first place.
It's being driven by profit and it's organized.
Well, that's the thing. That's the enigma of why we don't live in capitalism anymore. Because our economy is actually not driven by profit. We look at BlackRock, we look at all these companies, we look at these banks. It's being driven by debt. It's being driven by losses. And at the end of the day, it's actually not being driven by profit because most of these big companies are operating at a loss.
in those industries are still making money, even if
But
those
they're operating at a
industries
loss. Their profits
they,
are at a record
yeah,
low of all time. Profits are so low at. I mean, actually,
why did
that's the
Donald
origin
Trump
of the Nord
grow
Stream 2 thing. Is
6
that
times and yet he's still a billionaire, right? The company itself doesn't
actually
matter.
being a billionaire means nothing. The only reason Elon Musk is a billionaire because he owns a amount of shares in his company that he can liquidate into money, but he actually hasn't liquidated it. Most billionaires are not actually billionaires in the sense of having that much amount of monetary value in their account. All they have is amount of liquid assets that they could liquefy into that. But if they were to do that, they would lose their position in the first place. So that they really
Okay.
can't just do that. Most billionaires can't actually just liquefy all their assets and turn it into
Yeah,
billions that they're
okay.
going to
What
spend.
I'm saying again is that these
Those are shares in the
institutions,
company.
corporations, okay, these are just social constructs that we make
A
up, and they
corporation
might.
isn't a social construct. Come on, it doesn't function that way. It's a legally recognized entity by the government, and it functions
Yeah,
as such.
exactly. The entire thing is it's all a social construct. In nature, a corporation doesn't exist, but that's not what I'm trying to
Come
get at.
on, why is there
What
a
I'm trying to
dichotomy
get at
between
is
nature and I
that
don't agree with the dichotomy.
these industries can operate at a loss while still producing money for the people who have a stake in them, and they therefore have
They don't what do you mean?
incentive to
Produce money to
continue
do what?
doing
You
this.
understand in capitalism, you produce money to reinvest into the forces of production. The money you expend on what big booty bitches and yachts, that's not going to be like a big, huge, decisive factor in what's going to actually drive the mode of production. So they're operating at a loss, and the reason they're getting all these new investments
Well,
is
yeah,
because
the company
of the
is.
stock market. It's because their stock value is
Yeah,
going high and people are buying the shares. And they're
but the
liquefying
capitalists
the
aren't
asset
losing
value from the
any
shares
money.
in order to invest in their own companies. They're actually not doing it through the direct circuit. Actually, profitability today in this day and age through consumption, that's all a form of data. Profit is just a form of data, actually. Profit actually does not drive what forms reinvestment back into capital. What forms
Okay.
reinvestment back into capital is either coming from loans from banks, governments, or it's coming from these stock assets or the financial
Okay.
security assets, as in the
Let me
case of
just
entities like
pose a
BlackRock.
little scenario for you. So let's say you're a capitalist and you own a company. Okay, what incentivizes you, right, to continue to stay in business and to, I don't know, what incentivizes
Going to
you?
Mars, unironically. Is you have these huge, fantastical,
Not going to
ideological. No,
Mars.
unironically, going to Mars. Because that's why we live in socialism. All production is being driven at the subjective level by these capitalists, no longer even by the impersonal decision that they want to make it profitable, per se. That's what a manager does, actually. You hire like a manager or a CEO who makes sure, okay, we're going to make it profitable. But in terms of the underlying vision of why people want to prop these companies up, they have these huge overreaching visions of how they want to change the world and fundamentally transform how life is. I mean,
But
even
I'm talking
McDonald's
in
doesn't even
terms of,
say
like, for example,
McDonald's doesn't say that we're doing this for money. McDonald's doesn't even say that we're doing this because they want to give us hamburgers. McDonald's says we want to fundamentally change life at the most visceral, fundamental level. We want to, unleash the 15th dimension or some shit. Ronald McDonald's going to be the harbinger. He's going to be the Messiah. He's the new Jesus Christ. You have to understand, each and every one of these corporations under capitalism, all of them are actually considering themselves these ideologists who have these fundamental ideological visions of how to solve the social crisis. Elon Musk is the best example of this. Go to Mars.
believe them. Here, wait. What you're saying is that you fundamentally believe these companies and what they say that their mission is actually the truth, and that's
Well, you asked
genuinely
me
what
what
they're
their
doing.
subjective motivation is, and I'm telling you the subjective motivation is
No,
not actually making
I'm
money.
asking that. I'm asking, like, in the terms of the way that in Capital, Marx breaks down the capitalist mode of production.
In Marx,
What,
yes, as far as Marx is concerned, yes, a capitalist simply wants to make money for money's own sake and reinvest. Yeah,
exactly.
that's what capital is.
Thank you.
But that is not
Yeah,
what
so then why are you buying
defines.
bull crap that these fucking
Right, but
corporations?
that's
I don't
not
give a shit
what
they say.
defines
I'm
that's not
looking
what
at the
defines today's mode of
empirical
production.
reality and the way that it affects society as a whole and the workers underneath that structure. I don't give a shit what they say.
But
Right?
that's not the mode of production. The mode of production today is not profit for profit's own sake.
I mean, fundamentally, you kept bringing up the stock market, and what's the purpose of the stock market? It's so that people can invest to then produce a profit through dividends, correct? And
That's
companies
actually at the
legally,
popular level.
no,
When it comes to these
no,
major capitalists, it's
listen,
not.
companies legally, like legally speaking, it's codified into law. They have to act in the best interest of their shareholders to make profit for them.
I understand. But the shareholders, again, well, that's just anyone can do that. Listen,
Definitionally, the system is driven by profit. Okay, so I don't know
it's
what
not
it
driven
is
by
that you're.
profit. No, it's not.
I just
All these companies
explained
are
to
in
you.
debt and they're operating at a loss. It's not driven by profit.
Okay, but the shareholder is
You
still
could talk
making
about
money.
derivative. You could talk about at the derivative
Until
level,
the
right?
company goes bankrupt, they're still making money. Those people, they're not going to lose money.
Listen, the shareholders are just an arm of the company. The shareholders exist to help the company. The companies, it doesn't exist to help the shareholders.
Companies can exist without shareholders. There's private companies that don't
Yeah, I know,
operate.
but the companies don't exist for the shareholders. If a board of trustees doesn't accurately represent the company, that's what's going on. Even companies like BlackRock, which is the fullest manifestation of contemporary whatever capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
The least, whatever. Even BlackRock now has made its global mission to completely change the world, whatever, do all this kind of shit. Even BlackRock has a founding mission. And by the way, BlackRock is a form of socialistic central planning. Well, BlackRock uses algorithms on how to efficiently invest things into companies that are based on efficiency. And ultimately, profit is just a form of data about the efficiency of the investment of resources and the investment of capital.
Can you describe what BlackRock is? I have no idea what BlackRock is.
BlackRock is an investment fund, right? It's wisely, and you give it your money, and it's going to wisely invest your money into things that are going to make sure that it's going to, you're going to be a retirement fund or whatever the fuck. BlackRock tries to use algorithms to see what do we invest in, what's going to actually turn a profit and be wise to invest in.
Okay.
They manage financial assets.
Okay, so is it more or less something like a hedge fund or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it controls the whole. It's starting to swallow up the whole economy now.
Okay.
It's turning everything into a financial asset. Like buying up homes, buying up cars, everything. Financial asset.
I see.
But
no,
Brett doesn't even talk about BlackRock. I mean, he asked Boss about BlackRock. He's gonna, I want workers to democratically control BlackRock. How BlackRock is so completely parasitic? BlackRock. It's not about workers owning the means of progress, but how does our economy actually work? What makes it tick?
Yeah, no, it's both. I agree with you. It's both things. It's not only the way that it's organized, but what drives, the engine of the beast, obviously.
Yeah, because even if BlackRock was democratic control of the workers, it wouldn't make the effect it has on the people of this country any less destructive.
Yeah, I would have to look more into BlackRock before, I completely agree with you, but...
Well, Boss doesn't agree with that. Boss thinks that BlackRock is fine. There's nothing wrong with BlackRock. It's just that workers should be in control at BlackRock.
Yeah, I don't watch Boss.
That's what he says. That's what he believes.
I mean, okay. Good for Bosch, I guess. But no, fundamentally, just what I wanted to come on here was because of, how you were speaking, like, the word socialism. I mean, I feel like fundamentally
socialism, it's not a moralistic word. Let's stop being religious about it. It's not a reservoir of goodness or morality.
At all. It's just what I mean when I use the word.
All right, it's different
than the way you were describing
it. Does calling yourself socialist in public, does that get you hoes? Be honest.
No.
Are you trying to get hoes with the word socialism?
No, the way I get
hoes... I feel like you don't want the word to be diluted, because if everyone can call themselves socialist, it's not going to be able to be impressive.
Listen, I go out with my Bernie sweater, and I swear, I shit you not, like at least 6 hoes will come up to me and tell me how much they love Bernie, and then suck my dick. That's about it. I mean, there are some... I go to the University of Florida, and, there's some people who are, politically inclined, and if you can find a politics hoe, yeah, she will love to get her ears.
That's what I'm saying.
About socialism.
That's what I'm saying.
For the most part, no, they don't care.
Yeah, they do. Of course they do. I was also saying, oh shit. You get hella hoes if you say that shit.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about, but
that's it. I'm saying, you don't want to dilute it's not diluting the word socialism. It's not gonna stop you from getting hoes. It's gonna be a little harder. All you gotta do is go, start. What's the latest trend today, man? You gotta just go to the gym and what do they like nowadays? Be a goth. You have to look like a goth guy and whatever. They like guys who look sick. They like guys who look sick. You gotta be like that island boy guy. Be like Lil Xan and be like Lil who, Lil this. Make your hair all crazy, put colors in it, and get tattoos on your face and shit. And they'll be pretty much same thing. You don't have to worry about the word socialism, right?
No, it's okay. It's okay. I'll stay away from that.
All right.
Well, if you don't have anything to talk about, it was nice talking at the very least to clear your position up.
Bye-bye.
All right, have a good night. Bye.